Steve Lacy made a Grammy-nominated album on his iPhone. No studio, no fancy equipment, just earbuds and a dream. He wasn't supposed to be famous, he wasn't trying to blow up, he was just a quiet kid from Compton who loved his guitar more than anything. And somehow, that love would end up shaping the sound of an entire generation. Today, we're diving into how Steve Lacy went from making beats on his phone to becoming one of the most influential artists in modern R&B. And quickly, before the video starts, I would so greatly appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps me make more of these videos. So without further ado, this is the story of Steve Lacy, the accidental superstar. Steve Lacy didn't grow up with a studio or equipment, or really anything that hinted he'd become a musician. He was born in Compton in 1998, and his childhood wasn't easy. His dad wasn't around, and when he was, it wasn't in a good way. Steve said his father would only come by to give him money or to buy him something, then leave. And just when Steve started getting old enough to understand that, his dad passed away. Because of that, Steve grew up extremely shy, the kind of kid who blended into the background and watched everything from a distance. But there were two things he always gravitated toward: music and video games. And that game is what pushed him toward playing a real guitar. High school is where everything started to shift. He was still quiet, still introverted, but music gave him a real way to express himself. He joined the jazz band, and his natural feel for melody became obvious. Even without formal training, he had a sound that stood out. It was around this time that Steve met Jamil Bruner, a classmate connected to the R&B collective The Internet. Jamil saw talent in him and invited Steve to sit in on some of the band's studio sessions. When Steve first arrived, he wasn't there to perform. He mostly watched, quietly absorbing the group's creative energy. But he didn't go unnoticed. Sid, the band's lead vocalist, immediately noticed the quiet kid with the guitar. Eventually they let him play, and his tone caught everyone off guard. His style wasn't polished, but it was unique. It had character, something you couldn't teach. Around this time, Steve had already been teasing ideas online. Rough drafts of tracks like Some and early versions of Dark Red that fans didn't even realize would become some of his most iconic songs. Soon, Steve became a regular in the internet sessions, which started as a quiet visit turned into a real collaboration, and before graduating high school, he was contributing production to one of the most respected R&B groups of the 2010s, using nothing more than his creativity, his guitar, and an iPhone. Steve Lacy's creative process looked nothing like what you'd expect from a typical rising musician. He didn't have a full studio, just his phone, a guitar, and a weirdly powerful vision. Steve's studio was his iPhone. He used GarageBand, one of the most accessible music-making apps, to build entire tracks. To record his guitar, he used an iRig, a cheap interface that plugs directly into the phone. He'd layer drum patterns right on his phone, tapping into GarageBand's loops, and then record riffs, bass, and even his breathly vocals directly into the iPhone mic. In one Wired profile, Steve described how a session might go. He'd tap out a messy beat, play a guitar riff, delete it, then re-record over and over, experimenting until something felt right. After he had something he liked, he'd add a bass line, then lay down vocals, all from his phone. What's wild is that he wasn't doing this as some side hobby. By 2013, when he was still very young, he was already contributing to the internet's work. He even helped produce Ego Death, the internet's third album, working from this iPhone-based setup. That album went on to be nominated for a Grammy, and part of his production credit came from the files he made on his phone. Even when he got access to real studios, he didn't ditch the phone. It was too important to his process. According to him, making music on his iPhone wasn't just a workaround, it was freedom. He later talked about how he jailbroke his phone to use a workaround tool called Bridge to save songs because he didn't own a laptop yet. He also experimented with other apps like iMachine, Beatmaker 2, IMPC, but he kept coming back to GarageBand's simplicity. Steve has said that when he tried making real music on a real DAW like Ableton, it didn't feel the same. The track sounded too clean. For him, the roughness he got from GarageBand felt more honest, felt more him. This DIY era became a defining part of his identity, not just as a bedroom producer, but someone who turned limitations into art. Being around the internet didn't just give Steve Lacy opportunities, it reshaped his entire identity as an artist. When Steve first started showing up to their sessions, he was still a kid, 17, quiet, hanging in the back of the room with his guitar. But that didn't last long. The band could tell there was something different about him, a kind of effortless musical intuition. He didn't talk much, but every time he touched a guitar, they listened. This was during the making of Ego Death, an album that would become one of the most influential alt R&B projects of the 2010s, and somehow, this kid using an iPhone ended up helping shape its sound. His role wasn't flashy, but it was real. Steve co-produced tracks, added guitar parts, and brought his raw DIY style into a band filled with seasoned musicians. The crazy part? Some of the stems he gave them were literally recorded on his phone, and they kept them in the final mix. What made Steve stand out wasn't just his talent, it was his perspective. Everyone else in the room was working with full studios, synths, expensive gear, and then there was Steve, making riffs in the corner on a phone screen, but his ideas cut through all the noise. When Ego Death dropped in 2015, it blew up. Critics loved it, fans loved it. It became the internet's biggest album, and it earned them a Grammy nomination for Best Urban Contemporary Album. And Steve, he was still in high school. Most people don't get nominated for a Grammy in their whole life. Steve Lacy did it before he could even legally vote. But what mattered even more than the recognition was what came next. The band fully embracing him. After Ego Death, Steve wasn't the shy kid in the back anymore. He was an official member of the internet. Getting that spot didn't just give him credibility, it gave him a family, a creative home, and a place where his strange, minimalist, I make albums on my phone sound wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. The internet sharpened him, and he sharpened them right back. And now that the world had gotten a small taste of what he could do, Steve was ready to show what he could do alone. By the time Steve officially joined the internet, people in the industry were already whispering about him. There's something exciting and low-key intimidating about a teenager who can outproduce grown adults on nothing but a phone. But Steve wasn't thinking about fame. He just wanted to make something that sounded like him, something raw, imperfect, and personal. That became Steve Lacy's Demo, his debut solo project. Most artists pour everything into their first EP, rent studios, hire engineers, and lock in for months. Steve took the complete opposite route. He made the whole thing on his iPhone 6. No producer tags, no expensive mics, no industry polish. He'd record guitar riffs sitting on his bed, vocals whispered into his phone's microphone, bass lines tapped out in GarageBand like he was sending a text. It was the same process he'd been using since high school, but now there was a confidence behind it, a vision. The internet had sharpened him, but they'd also given him something even more valuable: belief. When Demo dropped in 2017, it didn't sound like anything else in R&B at the time. It was warm, lo-fi, kinda dusty, but intentional. It had this effortless cool to it, like someone letting you scroll through their camera roll, except the pictures were songs. Tracks like Dark Red, Some, and Ride felt intimate in a way that studio albums could rarely do. You could literally hear the texture of the phone microphone. The imperfections became the aesthetic. People didn't just listen, they became obsessed. Music nerds called him a genius, producers couldn't believe he made the whole thing on a phone, and fans connected with how stripped down and emotional it felt. Even critics took notice. For a debut EP, it made a big splash, bigger than a lot of full albums from established artists. This was the moment the world realized something. Steve Lacy wasn't just that kid from the internet. He wasn't a background guitarist, he wasn't a novelty act because he used an iPhone. He was an artist with a sound only he could make. And with one tiny 13-minute project, he proved he could stand alone. But Steve wasn't stopping there. The iPhone era wasn't a gimmick, it was the foundation. And now he was ready for his next evolution. By 2019, Steve Lacy had already done what most artists dream about. Grammy nomination, a cult favorite EP, major cosigns, all before dropping a full album. But now he was stepping into something new, his first real project as a solo artist. That became Apollo 21, a project that showed Steve wasn't just a lo-fi prodigy, he was evolving. From the first listen, you could tell Apollo 21 feels different. The sounds are bigger, the writing is bolder, and Steve himself feels older, more confident, more willing to experiment. He recorded most of it in his bedroom, which had basically become a DIY creative lab. Guitars everywhere, clothes on the floor, equipment stacked in corners, but unlike the demo era, he wasn't confined to his phone anymore. He still used it because it was part of him, but now he blended it with proper studio gear. Apollo 21 feels like the moment Steve fully stepped into his identity. Tracks like Inside showed a smoother, more sensual version of him, while Playground proved he could make weird, bouncy funk with a pop edge. Only If opens the album with this reflective, almost vulnerable tone, like he's talking to himself. And then there's Like Me, an 8-minute centerpiece where Steve fully opens up about sexuality, identity, and the fear of letting people in. It was honest in a way that surprised even longtime fans. The album didn't try to be perfect, it wasn't designed for radio, it wasn't chasing trends, it was just him. All his contradictions, all his interests, all his sounds mashed together into something that shouldn't work, but absolutely does. Critics picked up on it immediately. Apollo 21 got a ton of praise for being fearless, experimental, and completely uninterested in fitting inside any genre box. It even earned him another Grammy nomination, this time for Best Urban Contemporary Album. It even has my personal favorite song by Steve in it, so if you don't mind, I'd like to read it to you. Hate CD. When I hear this song, it instantly takes me back to my years in high school. Hanging out in my friend's garage while he works on his car and I talk about being in love. It makes me remember that feeling of going crazy over love, but also being so happy and just glowy because of it. The song speaks of being addicted to another person as if they were a drug. That imagery is beautiful in my eyes. I think it's a great way to describe how being in love as a teenager feels. Unsure, excited, impatient, and overwhelming, but still very beautiful and hopeful. While hearing this song, I'm reminded that not all anxiety and unsureness is bad. Thank you for listening to what I wrote. Now let's get back to the timeline. But what mattered even more was how it changed his image. People stopped seeing him as the iPhone producer kid. Now he was a fully realized artist, someone who could craft entire worlds, not just cool riffs. Apollo 21 was the reset, the rebirth, the album where Steve Lacy became Steve Lacy, but his next move would take him even further, straight into the mainstream spotlight he never thought he'd have. After Apollo 21, Steve Lacy didn't rush into another big, polished album. Instead, he did something way more personal. He opened the vault. In late 2020, Steve released a project called the Lo-Fis, but calling it an album doesn't really describe what it is. It's more like a diary, a scrapbook, a collection of memories from before the fame. The Lo-Fis is made up of old demos, voice memos, half-finished ideas, and forgotten sketches he recorded back when he was still a teenager experimenting in his room. Some of these songs were recorded on his iPhone, some were quick GarageBand loops he never planned to release. Others were early versions of melodies that would later become signature pieces of his sound. Most artists hide their early work, but Steve decided to share his. The project feels like you're being handed his high school notebook. Messy, emotional, unfiltered, but honest. Tracks like For Real, In Front of Me, I Think I Should, Out of Me Head, and When I all capture a younger Steve trying things, breaking rules, and trusting his instincts before he even knew they'd take him anywhere. What's wild is how good these songs still are. Even in their rough draft form, you can hear the exact elements that would one day define Steve Lacy's whole style. Warm, slightly distorted guitars, lo-fi drums that sound like they were recorded in a bedroom, vocals that feel more like thoughts than performances, and that dreamy, nostalgic mood only he can create. Releasing the lo-fi showed something important. Steve didn't become a genius suddenly. He had been one for a long time. This era reminded fans where he came from, before the Grammys, before the tours, before the sudden fame. It also bridged the gap between Apollo 21 and his next chapter. While everyone else saw the Lo-Fis as a side project, for Steve it was a reset, a way of grounding himself in the roots of his creativity before stepping into the biggest moment of his career. Because the next time Steve Lacy released a full project, it wouldn't just be a hit, it would change his entire life. By the time Steve Lacy started working on Gemini Rights, everything in his life was changing. He wasn't the quiet kid in the background anymore. He wasn't the iPhone producer anymore. He wasn't even just the cool internet guitarist. Steve Lacy was now a fully formed artist. And Gemini Rights was the album where he finally let the world hear what that actually sounded like. But the truth is, Gemini Rights didn't start from a place of confidence. It started from heartbreak. Steve has said how he had just gotten out of a relationship that shook him way more than he expected. You can hear it all over that album. The frustration, the hurt, the ego, the humor. It's messy in the most human way possible. And sonically, this was Steve leveling up in every direction. The funky guitar of Helmet, the chaotic emotional whirlwind of Buttons, the psychedelic edge in Mercury, the genre-blending chaos of Cody Freestyle. It wasn't R&B, it wasn't indie, it wasn't funk, it was Steve. A sound you couldn't categorize even if you tried. And then, there was Bad Habit. A song Steve made almost as a joke, a track he didn't even know if he wanted to use. Ended up becoming a global moment. A #1 Billboard hit, the kind of song that hits the internet so hard it becomes unavoidable. But what people forget is how unusual Bad Habit is as a pop song. No traditional structure, no clean formula, just a kid experimenting, switching grooves mid-song, bending melodies, talking and singing in the same breath, and somehow creating a generational anthem. Suddenly the world was paying attention in a way that they never had before. Steve Lacy went from being an underground favorite to headlining festivals, selling out world tours, and becoming a Grammy-winning artist. And what made this era so special was that he didn't compromise anything to get here. Gemini Rights didn't feel manufactured. It felt like a diary, a breakup, a spiritual cleanse, a rebirth. In one album, Steve didn't just prove he could make a hit, he proved he could build a world. And whether people were there for the heartbreak, the guitar, the aesthetic, or just the vibe, everyone realized the same thing. Steve Lacy wasn't rising anymore. He had already arrived. When Gemini Rights blew up, Steve Lacy's life changed fast. One second, he was dropping a heartbreak album for his core fans, and the next, he was playing to crowds 10 times bigger than anything he'd ever seen. The Gemini Rights tour wasn't supposed to be a massive cultural event. It was just Steve doing what he always did. Guitar in hand, band behind him, no crazy production, no gimmicks. But after Bad Habit hit #1, a new wave of fans pulled up. fans who knew one song, fans who wanted TikTok moments, fans who didn't really listen. And that's when things started to get complicated. At show after show, Steve realized the crowd wasn't singing the verses. They weren't vibing with the deep cuts. Half the time, they didn't even recognize the transitions, the riffs, the solos, the stuff his real fans had always loved him for. The energy was off, and the pressure kept building until one night, it cracked. Someone in the crowd threw a disposable camera at him, a moment that instantly went viral. Steve snapped, smashed the camera, and walked off stage early, something he had never done before. And the internet did what the internet always does. It made him the villain. Clips were taken out of context, people who had never listened to his music were suddenly experts, and for a moment, the narrative shifted. Steve Lacy hates his fans. He's ungrateful, he's rude. But the reality was way different. Steve wasn't mad that people knew Bad Habit. He was mad that people didn't care about anything else. He had just come off making his most personal album, bleeding into the music, performing his heart out night after night, and a part of him felt like it was being treated as background noise. And still, instead of letting the controversy define him, Steve did what he always did. He kept going. After the blow up, the tour actually got better. The crowd shifted. More Day One fans showed up, people came ready to listen, and the rooms felt more intentional, more connected, more Steve. And something else started happening too. People stopped treating Steve like a TikTok trend and started treating him like what he really was. An artist, a performer, a musician with vision, not just a viral moment. The controversy didn't ruin Steve Lacy. If anything, it made people pay attention to the depth that they had overlooked. It reminded everyone that Steve wasn't famous because of a meme. He wasn't famous off one song. He wasn't famous by accident. He was famous because he cared, because he built something real, because the music was actually good. And after all the noise faded, the only thing left standing was the art. At the end of the day, Steve Lacy's story isn't really about an iPhone. It's not about a viral hit or a controversy or even a Grammy. It's about possibility, because Steve showed the world something most artists never get to prove. You don't need perfect conditions to make something meaningful. You don't need 1 million followers to start. You don't need a studio, a team, or a blueprint. You just need a vision and the guts to follow it. Steve's whole career is a reminder that creativity doesn't come from equipment. It comes from you. He made music in his bedroom that ended up shaping the sound of modern R&B. He turned demos into classics. He built a completely new lane, a mix of soul, indie, funk, punk, and whatever he felt in the moment. He didn't wait for anyone to validate it. And that's why he resonates so deeply with this generation. He's proof that imperfection is powerful, that vulnerability can be loud, that a shy kid from Compton can accidentally become one of the most important voices of the 2020s, not by trying to fit in, but by being impossible to categorize. From the internet, to the Lo-Fis, to Apollo 21, to Gemini Rights. And lately, Steve's been teasing his next chapter with a new single, Nice Shoes. Even in just one track, you can hear where he's heading. Cleaner production, sharper songwriting, and that signature Steve mix of sarcasm, vulnerability, and smooth guitar work. It's like a small glimpse into whatever world he's building next. Familiar, but evolving. Like he's stepping into his next version without losing the spirit that got him here. Steve has consistently pushed the culture forward without ever losing himself. And maybe that's his biggest impact. He inspired a whole wave of artists to pick up whatever they had, a phone, a laptop, a cheap mic, and make something honest. No excuses, no fear, no permission needed. Steve Lacy didn't chase the spotlight, it found him, because he cared more about the music than the fame. As long as he keeps creating from that place, raw, personal, unfiltered, he'll keep shaping the sound of the future, whether he means to or not. And this has been the story of Steve Lacy, the quiet kid from Compton who rewrote what a modern musician can be, the accidental superstar. And if you made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you, and I would greatly appreciate it if you'd consider subscribing. It genuinely means the world to me and helps me keep making videos just like this. Regardless, I hope the rest of your day or night is amazing. Thank you.